Good morning, class. Welcome to ninth grade English, American Literature. My name is Brianna Murray, and I will be your teacher this semester. Before we begin, I thought it would be a good idea to have an icebreaker so we can kind of get to know each other a little bit better. And one of the things I thought we could maybe do is we can go around and I'll call you individually since we are on remote instruction. And I know everybody's screens may look different on the video chat. So I'll call you one by one and you tell me your name and tell all your classmates your name. And then also tell us your favorite book. It can be a contemporary book, a classic. It can come from any era of literature, whether it's Victorian or medieval or Shakespearean. I think since this is an English class, getting to know each other through the books we like is a really good way to establish some, common ground and interests. So I'll begin. I just introduced myself, I'm Brianna Murray. I'm your teacher, and my favorite book is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I like this book for many reasons, mainly because I find the writing style to be very clever and innovative and smart. But I also like that the book is bold and brave because J.D. Salinger, he's not afraid to explore darker topics that we don't really see in a lot of American literature in the 1950s. For example, he explores loneliness, feeling out of place in society, grief, longing, dealing with fears about the future. And I think he handles these really difficult topics in a very moving and resonant and profound way. So let's begin, and I'll call you, and we'll, do the warm up, and then we'll get right into the lesson. Okay, thank you guys. That was so good. I'm really glad that you all were willing to share. Thank you so much for that. So let's get into our lesson for today. So today we're going to be looking at S.E. Hinton's novel, The Outsiders. Now, The Outsiders is not only one of the most important books of American literature, it's also a staple of the young adult literature genre. I mean, any YA book that you can think of today that's contemporary, whether it's John Green's The Fault in Our Stars or Stephen Chbosky's The Perks of Being a Wallflower, these books exist because of S.E. Hinton and The Outsiders. This book was absolutely groundbreaking and extraordinary in what it does because it depicts teen life in a very gritty and real way. So before we begin, don't forget to consider some of the anticipatory questions I gave you, like what's the significance of the title, who are the protagonists and the antagonists in the work, and why is setting so crucial to the plot of the book. So keep those in mind as we go through these slides, and maybe it'll help you with the assignment that I'll give to you guys at the end of the lesson. So let's go ahead and begin right away. So here's some information about the life of the author. So S.E. Hinton, she was born Susan Eloise Hinton on July 22nd, 1948 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Much like the Greasers and the Outsiders, Hinton came from a troubled background. She described her mother as being physically and emotionally abusive, and she said that her father was cold, distant, and generally detached from his family. As a young girl, Hinton said she was happiest whenever she was at her grandmother's farm. Her aunt owned a horse at the farm, and Hinton was a gifted equestrian. In addition, Hinton was an avid reader and writer all throughout her childhood. Some of her early literary influences included Jane Austen, Mary Renault, Shirley Jackson, and F. Scott Fitzgerald. He's another writer we're going to look at later on this semester. We're going to be reading The Great Gatsby, an amazing book, very sad and heartbreaking, but it'll be great. So it's good to kind of see him as an influence now. We'll keep that in mind when the time comes. So you might be wondering, why did S.E. Hinton write The Outsiders? Well, there were a number of reasons, and here are just a few of them. The first reason was the troubling social dynamics at her school. So when she was in high school, S.E. Hinton was very repulsed by the social makeup of the school. She described it in the following way. You couldn't have a lot of friends. You got there and you decided what group you were in, or somebody decided what group you were in for you, and then you didn't have any friends outside of the group. And I was watching these people obey all these rules, and nobody said, where do these rules come from? Why do we have to do this? Why can't we have friends in any group we want to? So her school was very cliquey, very similar to the school Ponyboy attends, because in his school, it's greasers who are the children from the impoverished part of town, and the Socs, the children from the affluent part of town. So that social makeup was a thing in S.E. Hinton's school. There were greasers and there were Socs, and she was actually part of the greasers group, which is why we in the book are getting the perspective of Ponyboy and his friends. We don't really get a whole lot of insight into the life of the Socs, because to keep Ponyboy's narrative voice authentic, she wrote what she knew, and she wrote about the people she grew up with. Another thing that influenced The Outsiders was the violence among teenagers that S.E. Hinton saw. So, when describing her teen years, S.E. Hinton once said, "I was mad about the social situation at my high school, which was basically Socs versus greasers, like it is in the book. I grew up in a greaser neighborhood, and I got put in what would be called today AP classes with the Socs, so I could kind of see both sides. Then, when a friend of mine got beaten up on his way home from school, I got mad, and I began a short story about a kid who got beaten up going home from the movies. That story turned out to be about 40 pages long, single-space type, and I just kept going back over it and adding more details and flashbacks and so forth." So we do see that influence, particularly right in the beginning of the book, because Ponyboy is walking home from the movie theaters, and all of a sudden he's jumped by a gang of greaser boys. So that actually was rooted in reality, because S.E. Hinton's teenage friend had gone through the same exact thing. So we can see how realism is imbued within the fictional narrative. Another issue, this one's a bit more humorous, while the other ones were quite more intense: violence, cliques, social isolation, judgment. This one's a bit more funny. So when she was a teenager, S.E. Hinton just plain hated the selection of books that were available to teenagers. She once described the YA scene back then as having nothing realistic, being realistic, written for teens at that time. It was stuff like Mary Jane Goes to the Prom. And I'd been to a few proms, and that was not what was happening. I really wanted to read a book that dealt realistically with teenage life as I was seeing it. So she kind of felt that the books were very cliched, saccharine romantic tales, or very like corny adventures where things were wrapped up with like a neat little bow. And she was a very, I don't want to say cynical, because that's a harsh word, but she was like a very, she was skeptical about this stuff. And she kind of saw it as being a little, phony, a little rooted in cliche. So she wanted to write something that was more gritty, more authentic, because teenage life, as she saw it, was not Mary Jane Goes to the Prom. There were fights, there was uncertainty, there was anger and frustration. So she wanted to write a book that was realistic, and books where young people could pick it up, read it, and say, "Hey, I relate to this. I know what this is like." So that was like a big selling point for her: authenticity of the narrative voice, in the ways in which the characters are rendered, in terms of having a plot that moves along in a concise way. So all those things weighed into her considerations when writing the book. So here's something that you guys might be surprised to know. So S.E. Hinton actually wrote this book when she was just 15 years old. So she was you guys' age when she started writing this, right? Amazing. When she turned 16, she was actually able to get it published under fortuitous circumstances. So S.E. Hinton had a friend whose mother was a children's book writer. Hinton sent her a manuscript which she hoped would be forwarded to an agent. The road to publication for The Outsiders was astonishingly smooth from start to finish, and the novel was published by Viking Books. S.E. Hinton earned $1,000 for the manuscript. That might not seem like a lot to you guys back then, but in the 1960s, this was an astronomical amount. It was a very exorbitant and generous sum of money. And for her debut novel, absolutely incredible that she got published almost right from the get-go. She actually faced not one letter of rejection. So when she got this money for the book, she actually went ahead and purchased a horse because, like I said earlier, she was a lifelong equestrian. So she wanted to always have a horse of her own rather than go to her grandmother's farm. And that's what she put the money towards. So in 1967's The Outsider was finally published, and it was published to literary and critical acclaim. Actually, The Outsiders kickstarted a genre of literature known as the problem novel. And in the problem novel, kids in these books face real world issues, whether it's mental health, bullying, troubling family dynamics. And some authors who followed her lead and wrote problem novels, especially in the 60s and 70s, were people like Judy Blume, who wrote books like Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, about a young girl grappling with puberty as well as questioning her faith. And then Robert Cormier, The Chocolate War, which is about a boy at a prep school who rebels against what he thinks are oppressive rules that the principal enforces upon the student body. So she kickstarted an entire genre of young adult literature with the problem novel. So before we start talking about the themes, here's a little thing I want you guys to keep in mind about S.E. Hinton. It should be noted that a recurring motif in the work of S.E. Hinton is the struggle of teens to deal with prejudice and maintain innocence and hope in an often corrupt world. All of Hinton's novels suggest how young people are frequently shaped by their environment and are concerned with their struggle, only sometimes successful to leave the past behind and face the future. So let's get into the big topics of today. The themes from The Outsiders. So what are some of the core themes of the book, you might be wondering? Well, let's go ahead and get right into it. The biggest theme right off the top of my head, right, is the nature of family and friends. So in the book, most of the greasers come from turbulent homes with volatile parents. This is especially true for Johnny, who frequently runs away from home. Because their home lives are far from idyllic, the greasers strongly value the friendships they share with one another, and they become a chosen family. So this book says a lot about chosen family and the fact that you don't have any say who you're born to biologically, but you can cultivate a good, loving relationship with friends and people who are close with you. So that's a really great message that the book conveys, that you can choose those that you want to love. Most of the greasers gravitate to Ponyboy's home and the home he shares with his brothers Soda Pop and Dari. Although Ponyboy and his brothers are orphaned, the three boys have worked tirelessly to create a home that is safe and secure for themselves and their loved ones. And we see that in the book. Ponyboy mentions that he and his brothers are very domestic, and they cook and they clean and they take pride in their homes. And because so many of their friends come from homes where they're being physically, mentally, and emotionally abused, they always make it clear to their friends that their home is a safe space, and if things get too rough, they can always find solace at the Curtis family home. Throughout the novel, the reader sees that Ponyboy and Johnny are immensely loyal to one another, and they selflessly care for each other while they are hiding in the church. They read, they watch the sunset, and most importantly, each boy attempts to assuage the fears, worries, and concerns of the other through empathy and understanding. And we do see that in the sequences with Ponyboy and Johnny in the church. They just really bond. There's no mockery, there's no cruelty, there's no judgment. There's just a lot of love and compassion, and these two boys trying to overcome this very, very difficult ordeal together. Another theme that's very prominent is fear, right? Because one of the biggest plot points is when Johnny stabs Bob the Soc. And he does this out of fear because when they're coming home from the movies, Ponyboy and Johnny are jumped. And some of the greaser boys grab Ponyboy and they put him in a fountain. They dunk his head and they really intend to drown this poor boy. So Johnny sees this and he panics and he stabs Bob out of self-defense because he's convinced that Ponyboy is going to be killed that night, right? So that's the biggest thing. And Johnny acts out of self-defense, yes, but also he impulsively responds to fear. The greasers all walk around on high alert, fearing violence could erupt at any moment. We also see an instance where Johnny and Ponyboy run away to the church because they fear arrest in the aftermath of the violence with the Socs, right? And then we also see how Dally fears Johnny going to prison and falling victim to harm there, which is what prompts him to assist Ponyboy and Johnny running away to the church. Now, as you guys might recall, Johnny wanted to turn himself in to the police almost immediately, But Ponyboy was unsure what to do. But Dally insisted that they run away because he didn't want Johnny to go to juvenile hall because he had been in juvenile hall and had been exposed to a lot of sordid and ugly things. So he wanted to protect the boys from that. So his response to send them away to the church was a response to that fear for the safety of Ponyboy and Johnny. And he acts out of love and concern and deep worry. Another theme we can look at is overcoming fear and showing bravery. So ultimately, in this book, while there is a lot of instances where we see characters afraid, we also see characters who are brave and courageous and step up to do what is right and just and good, right? So here are some examples. Ultimately, Ponyboy, Johnny, and Dally overcome their fears by running into the burning church in order to rescue the children who are trapped inside. Cherry overcomes her fear by testifying against the Socs in court and states that Johnny had to stab Bob in self-defense as the Socs were physically beating him and attempting to drown Ponyboy. Ponyboy, at the end of the novel, is able to display bravery when he gets the courage and strength to write the account of everything that happened to him and his friends. This account winds up being the completed novel. That's a really cool literary device, as Hinton does, where what we're reading appears to just be a novel, but then at the end we find out that it's actually a composition Ponyboy wrote for his English class because he became deeply traumatized by all that had happened to him throughout this period of time. So when the teacher has him write this composition, he's able to muster up the strength to put his experiences down on paper and validate everything he went through and help himself, process through these emotions and process through these ups and downs he experienced in such a rapid period of time. A final theme that we have is the power of the written word. So books and writing play a major role in the novel. At the start of the novel, Ponyboy tells the reader that he enjoys reading and is interested in literature. And he mentions, like right off the bat that he's interested in Great Expectations. He's reading it in school and he's loving it. He loves the movies. His friends are not really into these things the way he is. So that kind of separates him from his peers in that one particular way. But it also kind of lets us see a more sensitive side to his character because he has an appreciation for art. Another instance of power of the written word is when they are on the run from the authorities, Johnny and Ponyboy read Gone with the Wind. The book not only offers them solace and escape from reality, but it also transforms Johnny into a reader as he becomes engrossed in the novel. So reading Gone with the Wind makes Johnny fall in love with books. And like Ponyboy, we see like this really nice transformation where before he wasn't much of a reader, but being with Ponyboy and reading that book, it made him realize like, hey, Ponyboy's really onto something with this interest in books. These things allow you to escape. They allow you to live different lives. And Johnny laments at one point in the novel that he's never left town. So when he reads Gone with the Wind, all of a sudden he's transported into the Civil Era South. And so he gets exposed to the power that books have. And it's like an intoxicating effect on him. He just becomes absorbed by the book. And even when he's on his deathbed, he asks Ponyboy to go to the drugstore and buy him a copy so he can finish it. Let's move on to point 3. So Ponyboy and Johnny share a mutual admiration for the Robert Frost poem Nothing Gold Can Stay. They correlate the idea of staying gold as remaining innocent, or at least as pure-hearted as possible in the face of tremendous adversity. So that's a big thing within the book. Nothing gold can stay. They're looking at a sunset, and Ponyboy recites the poem, and he and Johnny talk about, how the poem is beautiful and how it's meaningful to them. And then later on, towards the end of the book, Johnny tells Ponyboy, stay gold, meaning stay pure of heart, stay pure like the sunset, stay pure like the natural world. Don't, live in that world of the duality of greasers and socias, rich and poor, educated and uneducated. It's shallow, it's superficial, the sublime, all that is natural and intrinsic to the world, that stuff is gold. And if Ponyboy can keep those things in his mind and in his heart, he too will stay gold and stay above the ugliness which surrounds them in the community where they're living in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And the final point is, like as I was saying earlier, at the end of the book, Ponyboy writes the account of everything that has happened to him and his friends. Partially because he needs to complete a composition for school, he doesn't want to fail, but also as a cathartic exercise in which he can make peace with all the highs and lows he has experienced in his young life. So, like I was saying, that writing the account of his life and what happened with him and Johnny and the Socs, that's a way for him to exercise and work through his grief and his trauma and process these things. And through that process, he can go on the road to healing and he can move forward with his life and he can, maybe get insight into these things that he couldn't really think about because he was living it. And when you're living in the moment, it's very, very hard to reflect. And one final thing I want to call your attention to is the use of narrative voice. So although this book is nearly 60 years old, it still has a tremendous staying power. And one of the reasons why this is because of the narrative voice. Told from Ponyboy's first-person point of view, the novel empowers the reader emotionally, and the intimate tone of the narration is used as a tool for emotional socialization. In addition, the usage of slang makes Ponyboy feel real, more human, and that gives him a complexity and a depth that makes him relatable to readers. And if you notice, when Ponyboy is writing descriptive passages, he has a very formal, highbrow literary style. However, when he's chronicling dialogue, he captures the way he and his friends speak. So there's a lot of slang. One of the words they use a lot is tough. And it's a misspelling. It's spelled Tuff rather than Tough. And the reason why is because their version of tough, Tuff, it doesn't really mean rough and hard so much as the traditional definition. It means cool and slick and hip. So we see that usage of slang, and maybe in a school that type of language would be frowned upon, but in this particular novel, it really, really works because Ponyboy feels like an authentic teenager. He feels relatable. He feels like someone that can be a friend to maybe to you guys, like a boy you go to school with, right? So the use of the narrative voice is very deliberate and it's very intentional. And also because S.E. Hinton was a teenager herself, I think that also kind of gives the book a sense of truthfulness and validity because she was a teenager capturing the teenage life. So I think that also plays a role in why this book still moves young people and still is a favorite among teenagers today. So that's our lesson. Now for homework, what I want you guys to do is, because The Outsiders is a book that's very, very rich in terms of its thematic content, I want you guys to examine the book and reflect on it, and then tell me what you think the themes are. Please do 1 to 2 pages typed and double spaced, and it could be any theme you want. Feel free to write about whatever comes to your mind. Some other things you might want to consider is like coming of age and growing up and having to face the adult world, grief, the way masculinity is portrayed in the book, the way femininity is portrayed in the book. Maybe you might even want to, look into adults and the way adults figure into the narrative. There's so much you can mine this text for to extract themes and ideas and symbols and metaphors. So, don't be afraid to really dive into the text and extract a lot of meaning and write something that speaks to what you think is the truth of the book. And when you're done with that, you may email it to me, and then we'll schedule our Zoom session, and we'll talk about it together one-on-one. So I just want to thank you guys for your attention. You guys were great. You did a great job, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.